Hello, this is Dr. Lee again. I hope you're doing well today. This is a continuation of classroom management. This is the second discussion or video, and we're talking about building relationships with students. And I think most of us can remember, I hope you have a teacher that stands out to you when you think about someone who built a relationship with you. And the story that always stands out to me was not a teacher per se. He was a teacher, but he wasn't my teacher. He was my youth pastor. And his name was Pastor Ron. And I know most of us could say this, but middle school was a little awkward for me. And, my hair was out of control. And in 6th grade, I gained 30 pounds due to a physical issue. And I was just awkward. I remember distinctly not being popular. I wasn't unhappy about that, but I just knew that the popular people weren't my friends. And it was middle school, it was a hard time. And Pastor Ron, I saw him at least twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week, Wednesday night, Sunday morning, sometimes Sunday night, and sometimes another point during the week. And whenever I saw him, he made me feel like $1,000,000. First of all, he had all these nicknames for me, and when I walked into the room, he just lit up. It was like, oh, Heather's here. And he remembered what was going on in my week. He would ask me these specific questions. If I ever needed to talk to someone, he was it. He was the person I went to when the first person I knew died and I didn't know how to handle it. He was the person I went to for spiritual questions, for personal questions. He was it. And because he invested so much time into me, he ended up seeing some things in me that nobody else saw. And so he developed leadership skills in me and encouraged me to do things that I just didn't think I could do. And God used him immensely in my life. Every time I have contact with him, which nowadays is just mostly through Facebook, I'm always saying, thank you, Pastor Ron. Thank you. I can't tell you what a difference you made in my life. And I hope that there's someone like that in your life. And when you think about that person, I want you to try to imagine what specifically did they do to reach out to you, to develop that relationship. Because those individual specific skills, those are the types of things that you need to cultivate with your students. Now, all of us are different. So what was very natural for Pastor Ron, he was quirky, and he made up these funny nicknames, not just for me, but for everybody, for all the kids in the youth group. But they were very individual. That might not be something that comes naturally to you, but you might be a really good listener. And so you can use that strength to be someone who truly listens to kids and makes them feel accepted and that there's someone they can always talk to. That's a very valuable thing. So we're going to talk about some ideas for how you can build relationships with your students and see which of these stand out to you as like, hey, I could do that. Because you can't become a different person. God has made some of us to be very, very, very relational. It's kind of natural without a second thought. And there are others of us, like me, who have to work and focus on this area. And as long as we are willing to say, okay, I know this is important and I really need to work on it. So let's start where I'm strong. Maybe I'm good at remembering details. So maybe I can remember the details about my students' lives and I can remember to ask them questions. And so think about which of these things you feel like, oh, I can do that. And start to make them part of your persona as a teacher, what you are known and remembered for because you do it so well and you use it to make the students feel very comfortable. So when you're building relationships with students, I'm sorry about that, I made a wrong move there. All right, here are some ideas for building them. First of all, know their names. And even if you're a high school teacher and you have 150 students, learn those names. Do whatever it takes. Have a chart right in front of you. Practice them. Take a digital picture of them. Get the yearbook, but learn their names as quickly as possible and use them. The most beautiful word in the English language to anybody is their own name. So use their name. When you call on them, when you see them in the hallway. During the first week of school, there's a lot you can do specifically during that time to have students share about themselves and you can get to know them better. observing them, not just kind of being aware that they're there, but really observing your students in the classrooms and outside of the classrooms. What are they talking about? How are they interacting with other people? You can actually request conferences or interviews with students, or you could do it in a small group setting where maybe it's 3 students and you, and your goal is to really get to know very specifically as much as you can about them. There could be, you could have students write for you or complete questionnaires where you find out some important information about them. And also students' records may have some information, discussion with colleagues, and make sure that stays on the positive side. You don't want to hear all the negative about a student beforehand, particularly if that clouds your view of them. And you may even have an opportunity to visit a student of yours in their home or in their home community and learn more about them that way. So those are some initial ways, but getting even more specific, maybe not more specific, but more ideas. Students can share orally not only about themselves, but also stories about their families, something that's very close to them. A specific idea is to design a personal shield that reflects their interests, maybe with 4 or 5 sections in it, and it would be very unique to that student. Some teachers have them create collages that represent who they are and then present them to the class or to a small group. Writing a letter that describes their goals for the year and their future aspirations. That's something you could have your students do. And talking to their classmates to find out who has things in common, whose families are similar, who have done similar things. That can help you to build some community in your classroom. Now, will you do all of those? No, I hope not. That would take far too long. But you should think very specifically at the beginning of the year, what am I going to do to really let my students know I want to know about them personally, and how can I fit this in with my curriculum so that you're not just stopping class for several days to do this, but it builds in to what you want to teach them. Another area that's a specific facet of building relationships is listening to students. And we're not talking about just hearing them, but we're talking about intentionally listening to them. Because when someone listens to you, you know it, and it makes you feel good, and it makes you feel comfortable, and it's something that we should practice with our students. So here are some ways that you can build in some listening. You could build it in during a specific part of your lesson. Maybe there's a question that you ask, and then you very intentionally go around and you listen to student answers. You could plan the first few minutes of class or the final few minutes of class to have some type of a question where you're intentionally listening. Some teachers have kind of an open door policy at lunch or at other times, and students are invited to eat with them. I would always recommend that you do that with an open door and not alone with a student, particularly if it's a student of the opposite sex. But there could be, 2 or 3 students who regularly come and eat with you and chat and feel more comfortable in that. Here's an unusual one, part of after-school detentions. Sometimes we think of detention as just being in that room, by yourself, no talking, or maybe just working on their work. But what if for detention, you actually met with that student and got to know them better and tried to figure out why they're not turning in their homework or why they have a particular issue in your class, and truly listen to what they say and what they share. Between periods, when they're passing in the hall, those are times where you can listen. And then after school activities, when you get yourself out of the normal classroom setting and they see you at the basketball game, the football game, the band concert, it really blesses, it really encourages your students and let them know that you want to know who they are. And that's where you can also meet parents, meet siblings, and get to know your students that way too. So those are a variety of different ways that you can start to develop relationships with your students. And again, I want you to think of which of these things resonates with you, which are things that you think you would be able to do. Now, along with building relationships, there's also the physical layout of your classroom, literally the room that you teach in. And there are things that you can do with that room to make it a more comfortable, positive place. So when you walk into your first blank classroom, first of all, you need to look at the fixed features. My very first classroom had 2 poles in the middle of the classroom, and those poles really demanded a lot. I mean, I had to rearrange things around those poles to make sure students could see. So you want to think about that. Where are the windows? Where are the unusual things in that classroom? Then you want to think about the materials and supplies. You want them to be accessible, but you want it to look nice, and you want things to be stored in a very organized way. You want to think about the traffic areas. That's where students are going to be walking around, turning in things, entering the classroom, exiting the classroom. How can you make that as functional as possible? You definitely want to make sure your students can see you and you can see them. That should be a given in however you arrange your seats. There should be some flexibility so that sometimes the desk might be one way, sometimes another way, depending on what you're doing as a class. And then think about what you can do in the classroom to create some ambiance, to make it more warm and personal. I know a teacher that I learned from when I was a new teacher, she always brought in her own lamp for her desk. It was the corner of her desk, and she always turned on that lamp during the day. And she said for her, that made a huge difference. And I can tell, I mean, just looking at her desk, it was like this calm, cozy place versus kind of the harsh fluorescent lights that I just used all the time. So think about how you can make it personal, some decoration ideas, and some things that you can do to make your room look nice. And then also you may have some issues with accommodation. That maybe a student has some visual problems and you need to make sure that they can read what's in your classroom. Maybe someone is in a wheelchair and you need to arrange things so that there's no issues, there's no difficulties for that student. So you need to think about your physical classroom, and a specific element of that is your seating arrangement, how you arrange the desks or the tables, whatever it is that you've been given. And you want to pick what best meets your instructional needs. Sometimes you might have groups or pods of students facing each other for group interaction. And this does allow you, you can also have it the other way, the more traditional rows that are, straight rows facing forward. That could allow students to be more focused on you, the teacher, and to work on independent work. So you have to think about what's going on in your classroom. I do recommend for new teachers at the beginning of the year to start with the traditional. Now you may be told that you have to do it a different way, or you may be told you have to do it with straight rows, which you actually might not like. But if classroom management is going to be an issue at all, I would recommend starting with that traditional route until your procedures and your rules, your procedures are really well established. Because then you can turn them into groups and you already have the foundation for the type of classroom that you want. So seating arrangement is something to consider as well. In the next video, we'll go on to talk about the environment and the atmosphere that you create in your classroom.